So when you clear EOC 3 after finishing the tutorial of the game, you unlock Bahamut Cat. This is one of the most influential and important units in the history of the game. But now that he's recently fallen on somewhat hard times until getting talents in 14.2, now seems like a good time to talk about him. About Bahamut Cat, the absolute core of mid-game. Okay, but before that, I'll talk about the early game usage. I know I just said mid-game, and the title probably says that too, but early mid-game just doesn't sound as nice and clickable, okay? Bahamut Cat is a backline nuker. In the extreme early game, we're talking before Urarun, Bahamut is probably going to be the only nuker you have, as well as probably your highest ranged unit overall. In this case, he will serve as a key unit against enemy backliners and even mid-rangers in the early game. Being at 450 range allows him to outrange enemies at 350 plus range that Valkyrie can't handle otherwise. Things like Bear variants, Laboyne variants, Smooth variants, and is also safer and stronger than Valkyrie for the 300-ish range enemies like Aros and Owlbrow. His 85k nuke damage is still very high, even for Uber standards, but his TBA is an equally comical 20 seconds, leading to an alright overall DPS of 4.25k, at least for early game. Additionally, Bahamut is great on Crazed Cat, Crazed Tank, and Crazed Fish, all of which should be the first 3 Crazed Cats that you attempt. It'll be great until you get Urarun. Urarun is similarly a backliner, but with 440 range, and has a similar 4.28k DPS, but is much easier to use. Which leads me to Bahamut's many flaws. Bahamut's custom cooldown is alright, but his health is pretty low, so he's in danger when any enemy gets close. Now, by far the biggest problem is the 20 seconds TBA, as well as that comical 4 seconds of force swing. He takes 4 full seconds to wind up his attack. If he starts charging up his energy ball on a weak peon instead of the main threat, he is almost guaranteed to miss. On the other hand, if the enemy does reach him within that 4 seconds, he takes a lot of damage and has to restart his attack animation. So now you have this dilemma. You either use units to protect Bahamut, which might knock the enemy out of his range and cause him to miss, or you don't use units to protect him, which might allow the enemy to push hard enough and knock him back, forcing him to restart his animation, which makes him very clunky to use. That said, his pure nuke damage is still enough to justify his usage, especially early game when you have no other options for backliners. Speaking of other options, that brings me to Urarun. The main difference that Urarun has compared to Bahamut is that she attacks fairly rapidly in exchange for dealing much less damage per hit. Her force swing is also much faster, so she's both much less likely to miss and much less punishing if she does. This does make her much easier to use in general, but that doesn't leave Bahamut completely without a niche. Bahamut's front-loaded damage is still very high. Lucas the Fourth made a very good video on this topic that you should watch if you haven't already. This just about concludes the usage of Crazed Bahamut. On to Awakened Bahamut. After clearing Into the Future Chapter 3, you will unlock Awakened Bahamut. And so instead of becoming a stronger ranged nuker, Awakened Bahamut instead turns into an all-out suicide rusher. He exchanges 250 range, now he's at 200 range, for a truly absurd number of buffs. Firstly, he gains 10 times the speed, from 6 speed to 60 speed, which turns him straight into a rusher. His force swing has also almost been fully eliminated, and his overall is now only 3.1 seconds, which is a whopping 84.5% decrease from evolved form. Keep in mind that his damage per hit is also increased, albeit only thanks to 2 multi-hits. His knockback count is also doubled from 3 to 6, and his cooldown is also reduced, which are very nice for reasons I'll explain in a bit. He also now sports a comically large 30k DPS. So what do these buffs mean in practice? Obviously me just listing off buffs doesn't quite let you visualize it, but if you've been looking at the B-roll footage, you kinda know. Basically, Bahamut rushes up to an enemy to do huge damage in a quick burst. Should Bahamut not be knocked back, that means he's probably not taking damage and he'll survive longer. Should Bahamut be knocked back, chances are he's already finished with the first big hit of 85k damage and will immediately rush back to restart the animation. This is also well known as rebound, and this allows Bahamut to quickly rush 200k to 300k damage within a very short burst window before dying. He is also a great unit against LD enemies due to his blazing 60 speed and mere 200 range, which is enough to enter almost, if not all, LD blind spots. This is Awakened Bahamut's role, and he is really good at it. So good that he forms the backbone for God knows how many stages. Bahamut's existence is the core of so many stages, especially rush stages and advent stages. Just to list a few, Bahamut is key in Realm of Carnage to kill the Aros quickly and with few enough knockbacks to not push into Hanya's rage too much. He is the key in No Plan A to be able to rush down the Sleipnir and infiltrate Clownell's blind spot to do huge damage, and basically the same thing with Queen Bee. He can solo Doremi when positioned properly, he can change the H-Nods and learn to love, and rush Mina down quickly enough before she destroys your base. He also naturally has great matchups into the melee enemies he does outrange, like Lil Bun Bun and Manic Lion. He's basically also the only thing that can reach Manic King Dragon and actually do damage. On floor 40, Bahamut Chains are one of the main strategies to actually do damage to Eulala. Even when he's not the absolute core of the strategy, he can still be of great help. On floor 30, he can either be used to chip huge burst damage on the Hermit, or deal with a difficult Peon wave. I could keep listing usages on and on, but I think you get the point. Bahamut is so necessary on so many stages that I can dare to say that he is the absolute core of mid-game. But why only mid-game? Why not late-game? Simply put, power creep. Bahamut's stats are strong mid-game, but they can't quite keep up late-game. To be clear, his destructive power is still fine, but his other aspects fall short. 25.5k is incredibly low. I mean, it's never been high even in early mid-game, but late-game enemies can straight up one-shot him without giving him a chance to rebound at all, which greatly limits his damage output. It also allows him to easily get sniped by LD enemies late-game. He also doesn't have any immunities either, at least before talents, but even then, he still doesn't have wave, surge, and explosion immunity, which makes him even harder to use as the latter two gain prominence. One of the most flashy parts of Bahamut's fall-off is the buffs towards exclusively Yukimura, making him even better in general. At level 30 with no talents, Yukimura deals about half the damage with slightly more health. But by far the biggest strength he has over Bahamut is his mobility. Obviously they're both blazing fast, but Yukimura only costs 3075 to Bahamut's 4500. And he only has a 51 seconds cooldown to Bahamut's 97 seconds. This makes Yukimura much easier to spawn and much less punishing if you don't get enough value for him. Even so, at level 30, Yukimura's general damage leaves much to be desired. But what if you further invest in both? Here's an interesting fact I bet almost none of you know. Bahamut is the only unit in the entire game whose first reduction point is at level 30. I don't blame you for not knowing. I bet this means absolutely nothing to most of you, because this is a really obscure term. But when you level up a unit, every single level increases the stats of that unit by 20% or 1/5 of the unit's level 1 stats. This stays the case until a reduction point. At a reduction point, it's exactly what it sounds like. The stat gain you gain from leveling the unit up is halved. And a decent chunk of units have a second reduction point, where the gains are further halved. Though these reduction points are usually high enough that you don't really have to worry about them unless you have plus levels. For Ubers, their first reduction point is at level 60, but for Bahamut, His first reduction point is level 30. What this means is that at level 50, the comparison further skews towards Yukimura, especially in terms of health, which is a whole 10k more than Bahamut. But here's where Yukimura's Uber treatment really outshines Bahamut's. Yukimura can be boosted to level 60 and he has actually good talents. So if you were to dump 15 Dark Eyes and 585 NP to boost Yukimura to level 60, which you can't do with Bahamut yet, he has double the health and 2/3 the damage. With Strengthen, he can even surpass Bahamut in damage, while still retaining the qualities that make him so much easier to use than Bahamut. Notably the double health, half cooldown, 2/3 cost on top of actually having a niche. In my Dahlia-san Theorem video, I briefly mentioned that he can't quite keep up, and this is one of the main reasons why. So, literally a few days after I wrote this segment of the script, Bahamut's talents were revealed. So I was just saying that his destructive power is perfectly fine, and I still believe it is. So instead of patching up the other flaws by giving him like immunities or more health like I expected them to, they just gave him even more destructive power. Surprisingly enough, he didn't get stat talents, but instead he just gained 100% explosion on the first hit. If you thought Bahamut wasn't already causing the apocalypse, now he can create explosions and do double damage. Although at this point most guide makers and or YouTubers are already in like the post-game, or at least UL clear, myself in that latter category, you can probably get these talents by early UL in a floor 30 style stage that's also available at all times, although it does disappear after you clear it. Oh yeah, I guess I should mention that immunity to slow is something, but honestly you would rather avoid it getting hit by slow at all. But I guess it can help with like Haniwanwan, Angaburu, and Professor A. So on top of possibly doubling his damage, he also effectively gains Pierce. He still deals his full damage with 75 Pierce, 77k damage from 276 to 375 range, and a solid 44k damage from 375 to 475. That is absurd reach. If there's a stepping stone, he can even hit backliners for 40 to 80k damage within a short burst window. And unlike Wave and Surge, which have a bunch of behemoths that are immune to them, at least as a 14.2, there are 0 enemies that are immune to explosions. This means that if Bahamut lands a hit, which is almost guaranteed, he'll lay waste to the enemy battlefield, even against behemoths with the most random immunities. At least so far. And now Yukimura is back to being a side grade to Bahamut like he was back during the level 30 era. I cannot wait for 14.2 to come out for EN. So I think that's about it for Bahamut. I probably still missed quite a bit considering the sheer power and versatility of Bahamut's two forms. Thanks for watching and I hope you enjoyed. As usual, let me know what you think about this video, any suggestions to improve and whatnot, and what ideas for Bahamut Cat's videos, or even HSR videos if you play that game. Alright, bye.